Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 938 for April 3rd, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
That was for everybody in Midleton. It was fantastic for me to get it, but to be honest, it was a team effort. And I kind of equated to a kind of a man of the match in a sporting context. You know, you rely on the other 10 players or 14 players to get that man of the match award.
Midleton Distillery's Kevin O'Gorman was named Master Distiller just 2 years ago, but he is making a mark on the whiskey world. The other night he was named Master Distiller / Master Blender of the Year by Whisky Magazine in the annual Icons of Whisky Awards. We had the chance to sit down over drams in Dublin following the announcement, and you'll hear our conversation later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Your Voice, April's Whiskey Club of the Month, and on Behind the Label.
There is something special about raising kids with the distillery there for them to go and play in. Now, health and safety nowadays would probably say empty barrels aren't the safest playground, but it never harmed my kids, and they've both actually joined in the whiskey industry as they've grown older.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
The average college basketball power forward is 6'9", which, according to my rough calculations, is 16.5 times my height. I'll stick to aimlessly pottering around in back gardens.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Dewar's brand ambassador Gabriel Cardarella here. And as the weather starts to finally warm, I wanted to remind everyone of one of the best ways to float in a pool with your favorite whiskey. The Dewar's Highball is simple and refreshing. Anyone can make it. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Cheers.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Last month, we reported that the Bardstown Bourbon Company had been sold in a management-led buyout with support from Pritzker Capital Management. Now, the new owners are pumping even more money into what arguably can be called one of Kentucky's fastest-growing distilleries. The $28.7 million expansion will increase distilling capacity by 50% over the next 2 years, with an additional column still and 16 new fermenters. It's also expected to create at least 29 new jobs. Last year, we reported on Glengarry's expansion project that includes a new visitors center. Now, the distillery in Old Meldrum, Scotland, has reopened to the public once again, just in time for the start of tourist season. Tours will highlight the distillery's investments to make it more sustainable, including new floor maltings and a new system for direct-firing distills that will reduce Glengarry's carbon footprint by at least 15%. Also on the sustainability front, Ireland's Bowen Distillery has started a new campaign to offset the impact of the wood it uses to mature its whiskies in. The family-owned distillery is planting 2,000 trees this year on the Preston estate in County Meath, with plans to plant the same number of new trees each year going forward. The distillery has already been honored by Ireland's Bord Bia for its environmental efforts. A couple of months ago, we reported on a dispute within the Irish whiskey industry over who should enforce the standards for Irish whiskey in other countries, specifically the U.S. The Irish Whiskey Association has now withdrawn its original application with the U.S. government for what is called a certification mark. Essentially, that's a special kind of trademark that gives the holder the right to enforce standards in the U.S. court system. A small group of distilleries that are not part of the association objected to a trade group holding that power, and while the decision to withdraw the application could be seen as a victory for that group, IWA Executive Director William Lavelle called the move a short-term tactical delay when I met with him in Dublin this week.
Well, first of all, the United States is our largest market for Irish whiskey, 43% of all sales, 18% growth last year. So it's really important that Irish whiskey is protected in the United States. We have a level of protection. We would like to get a certification mark, which would be another layer of protection. We applied, but actually having reviewed our application and looking at all the legal issues involved, we decided that to withdraw the current application and resubmit. And a lot of that is about just, it's a very complex application process. You have to have a lot of stuff in place, and we felt actually, having looked at our current application, it would be better to double down on our relationship with the two government departments in Ireland and Northern Ireland to put in even a stronger application next time. So we're not giving up on certification mark. We've just, as I say, reviewed it, going in with another application, and in parallel we're intensifying our own lobbying in the United States with the TTB to enhance the protection of Irish whiskey. Look, it's really important that American consumers who are flocking to Irish whiskey have that certainty that what they're buying is authentic Irish whiskey, and we'll do whatever we can through whatever legal means available to make sure that happens.
Does it make more sense to do this through the IWA as opposed to the two government agencies on both sides of the border with potentially differing political views?
Well, there is a complexity for Irish whiskey because we span two jurisdictions, Ireland and Northern Ireland. And, you know, when you're getting two governments to try to apply, it can raise issues. As an all-island trade association representing 98% of the industry and with an experience and a record in protection, I think we're still obviously the ideal body to hold this. But in all cases, we will work with the governments, you know. And there's other markets around the world where it's not appropriate for us to hold protections, and we work with government. So we make decisions on a case-by-case basis. Ultimately, it's about Irish whiskey. It's about protecting Irish whiskey, and we will be working with both authorities to figure out what is the best approach to ensure Irish whiskey is fully protected in the US, including through certification marks. And like I say, we're not precious about this. It's not about who holds it as far as we're concerned. It is about making sure that, you know, we have the protection, and I think the US certification mark application process, very complex. The most important thing is we get it right and we get the protection, and we'll work with the two of the departments, as I say, to get the best solution to that.
And the concerns of the 2% who aren't members, that this might be used against them, there are already protections in the US law to keep that from happening, right?
No, absolutely. And every time we get protection as Irish Whisky Association, every genuine producer of Irish whisky benefits, whether they're a member of IWA or not. As long as you make Irish whiskey in line with geographic indication, you benefit from our protections. And that's not just in the US, that's across all the other markets where we've applied for certification marks or protection for Irish whiskey. The only people to be afraid are the guys who are producing fake Irish whiskey. They're the only losers in all of this. And I think it's really important that we clamp down on fake Irish whiskies.
How big is that problem?
Unfortunately, it is becoming an increasing problem. When you are the fastest growing spirits category in the world and the fastest growing imported spirit in the United States, you have a lot of cowboys and crooks who are trying to get in on the action. So we see quite a bit of, in the US, we see quite a lot of Irish style, Irish type whiskies. In other markets, maybe in Eastern Europe, we would have seen, you know, domestically produced white spirits with a bit of caramel colouring being sold as whiskey. So in our major markets, we have seen this as being an issue.
By the way, the association held its annual general meeting this past week and increased the budget for the legal department to go after counterfeiters worldwide. Meanwhile, Jameson is going back to its past for its latest Irish whiskey. If you're into music, you're probably familiar with the concepts of remastering and remixing classic songs. The Irish Distillers blending team is taking those approaches with the new Jameson Anthology range. The first release is a remastered version of the Jameson 15-year-old, last seen in the early 2000s. Blender Deirdre O'Carroll explained the emphasis on single pot still whiskey in this release when we talked the other night in Dublin.
We looked at previous expressions, but we really wanted to make this our own to stand out, and what we did is we looked to the past and we realised that the building blocks to create an expression was sherry butts and also MMP4, which is our quintessential trad pot style whiskey, and we made sure that this was our foundation. and we then brought in other different cask types and different distillate types and layered this in to create what's now known as the Jameson 15 Remastered.
And this is part of an ongoing series that we're going to see more of like this in the future, right?
Correct. So we have the Jameson Anthology series, so we're looking at remastered classics, so different volumes in the classic. So this would be the first volume of many to come, and we also are looking at the remixed version of Jameson, and that's all about experimentation and really pushing the boundaries while keeping the DNA of Jameson alive.
Jameson 15 Remastered will be a limited edition release with just 2,200 bottles available by ballot. The first ballot opens to members of the Midleton Distillery Barrel Club Monday morning, while the public gets its chance starting this Friday, April 8th. The price is €300 for a 500 ml bottle, and the whiskey will not be available in the U.S. Other new whiskeys hitting the market. Glen Scotia is releasing its oldest whiskey yet, a 46-year-old single malt distilled in 1974. It could be called triple cask matured. It spent the first 36 years in refill bourbon barrels, then 6 years in first fill bourbon, with the final 4 years in an Oloroso sherry butt. Only 150 bottles will be available. The recommended retail price, £6,750 each. Dewar's is kicking off the Craigellachie cask collection with a 13-year-old Armagnac cask-finished single malt. The whiskey started out in a combination of refill and recharred ex-bourbon barrels before spending a little more than a year in the Armagnac casks. It's available now in the UK, France, and Germany, with a recommended retail price of £52.99 a bottle. It'll be available later this year in the US and Taiwan. Bladnoch Distillery is releasing Alinta. It's a lowland single malt, matured in a combination of bourbon and Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. Look for it at around £90 a bottle in the UK. No word yet on U.S. availability. In the U.S., Stoli Group's Kentucky Owl is now exporting its Wise Man bourbon to the UK, with the end of tariffs coming in a couple of months from now. But there is also a new Kentucky Owl Wise Man release for the U.S. The Wise Man Straight Rye comes from an undisclosed distillery and is being bottled at 50.4% ABV. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $60 a bottle in the U.S. Beam has released another new Basil Hayden expression. Basil Hayden Subtle Smoke is finished in barrels that have been infused with hickory smoke before being filled with whiskey for 6 months. It's a limited edition release that will sell for around $50 a bottle. I received a sample the other day. I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at WhiskyCast.com. And finally, it took a couple of years because of the pandemic, but the Australian Malt Whisky Tasting Championship crowned its latest winner last Saturday. The event was originally scheduled for 2 years ago, but Seamus Carroll waited patiently to claim his place as the top taster in a field of more than 150 competitors. He guessed all 8 whiskeys correctly in a blind tasting sponsored by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society's Australian chapter. He'll receive a trip for 2 to Scotland to visit the Society vaults in Edinburgh, along with bragging rights until the next competition 2 years from now. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. First off, we got late word that the Hong Kong Whiskey Festival, originally set for last weekend, had to be postponed because of COVID-19 issues in Hong Kong. It'll now be held on September 17th and 18th. In the meantime, tickets are still available for Whiskey and Barrel Night this Thursday in Tampa, Florida. The Taipei Whiskey Club has a tasting of Loch Lomond whiskies April 13th. Wino in Arlington, Virginia has a Catoctin Creek tasting that same night. McTeers has its next auction of rare whiskies April 15th in Glasgow, Scotland. And I'll be at the Nth Universal Whiskey Experience April 22nd and 23rd in Las Vegas. The Whiskey Fair is that same weekend on the 23rd and 24th in Limburg, Germany. And tickets for the Spirit of Toronto Festival May 7th will go on sale starting on April 12th. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new BuyVirginiaRye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
While there are several claims to the first highball in the United States, Dewar's is certainly amongst them. The highball trend was born and proliferated in Japan as a more sessionable and alternative approach to enjoying whiskey. Sure, neat or perhaps with a drop of water or two is the best way to enjoy whiskey, but it isn't always the most refreshing. With infinite spins and twists on this relatively simple cocktail, it's important to start with premium ingredients. Our latest innovations like Dewar's 8-year Caribbean rum cask finish or our 8-year Mizunara cask finish are both complex, double-aged whiskeys that will stand up to the chill of ice and effervescence of soda nicely. The base recipe is simple, but the trick is temperature. Fill a chilled Collins glass with ice. Add 2 ounces of your favorite Dewar's over the ice. Top with club soda right from the fridge. And lastly, throw in a lemon wedge or peel and serve. More time in the sun, less behind the bar. Curious? Begin with a basic highball recipe, then start experimenting based on your personal taste and flavor preferences. Sky's the limit.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. I was in Dublin this week for the launch of the Jameson Remastered 15-year-old, and the timing could not have been better, since it was just a couple of days after Midleton Master Distiller Kevin O'Gorman was named the Master Distiller / Master Blender of the Year in Whisky Magazine's Global Icons of Whisky Awards. Kevin and I sat down over drams in the blending room at Jameson Distillery, Bow Street in Dublin. So I got to ask, first of all, what was it like the other night when they announced you as the Master Distiller / Blender of the Year at the Icons of Whisky Awards?
Mark, it was fantastic. It was a great night in London on Thursday night. I was delighted. I was overwhelmed, to be honest with you. I think the great thing about the night was that, you know, we had lots of various distilleries, people from Ireland there. And, you know, it was just a great camaraderie there. You know, we obviously, Irish distilleries won quite a lot of awards on the night, and it was great to see that. So a great atmosphere. And it was great for me as well, because Billy, Dave and Deirdre were with me at the table. So it was this very special occasion. But you know what? I've said it to Dave, Deirdre and Billy that, you know, when I sat down after getting the award, you know, that was for everybody in Midleton. It was fantastic for me to get it, but to be honest, it was a team effort, and I kind of equate it to a kind of a man of the match in a sporting context. You know, you rely on the other 10 players or 14 players to get that man of the match award, and that's how I see it. So I think I have to thank everybody in Midleton and in Irish Distillers in general for giving me that opportunity. It really is. It's a privilege. It really was.
And then back to work on Monday morning.
Back to work Monday morning, yeah. So I'm actually in Dublin today. So yeah, it's busy, but we had a good weekend, and I celebrated at home as well. And went to my local on Friday night when I got back, and we had some good friends there. So it was great. It was wonderful.
And you get the title for both Master Distiller and Master Blender of the Year, which is appropriate considering that the new Midleton Very Rare just came out with your signature on the bottle. You actually blend this one instead of Billy Layton and the entire team, right?
Yeah, my name is on the bottle of Midleton Very Rare, so I get the chance, the privilege of putting together the Midleton Very Rare vintage. And you know what? It's a wonderful honour, it really is. This is my second one. So MVR 21 last year was my first, and that was a wonderful thing, wonderful opportunity. And this is the second one. And again, they say in music, the second album is the most difficult. This was a great challenge, and I started working on it probably last July. And there's a number of months putting all the samples together. So Midleton Very Rare is a blend of our finest grain whiskies and pot whiskies. So I have, I suppose, the unique opportunity to sample all these casks and decide how I want to put them together. How much grain whiskey I want to include, how much pot whiskey. Midleton Very Rare is all American oak. It's all American barrels. And always has been. Barry Crockett, when he started off in 1984 with Midleton Very Rare, was a huge fan of American oak. And it has stayed that way to this day. So it's all American oak. It's a blend of grain and pot whiskies. In MVR 22, you can also select the range of ages as well. So in this one, we're looking at between 12 and 33 years of age. So some very, very old whiskies in this. And also then I can decide as well how much first fill, second fill and even third fill, if I wish, goes into the blend, which has an important impact on the amount of vanilla, the amount of toffee that comes through, this wood contribution. So you can control that as well. So in this particular one, I increased the first fills, American oak, slightly. I kept the grain whiskey, the grain element up, similar to last year, because I really love that grain contribution. And the whole thing comes together wonderfully. So we should maybe try it.
We have a glass of it here, so as I'm tasting this, my tasting notes were in the last episode of WhiskyCast, but it still comes across as really well balanced. Just one of these classic Irish blends that you try to keep consistent, at least with past releases, somewhat, right?
Yeah, so, Mark, MVR, Midleton Very Rare, has its own DNA, its own, I suppose, personality. The American oak is a key feature of that. So this, amazing contribution of vanilla, toffee, kind of butterscotch, I call it a creme brulee, really comes to the fore, especially in MVR 22. But it has its own DNA, it has its own structure, and we keep that together. But I suppose I can play around with a number of variables, be it the age, be it the grain pot components, be it the first fill, second fill, third fill. I can play around with different tunes to come up with a different vintage every year. And the other thing I do as well is that within the pot element of MVR, we produce different types of pot, as you know, in Midleton. And this year I played around with those pot elements quite a bit, and I felt that some of the medium-style pot, which I selected, just gave it that extra fruit. I get lovely sort of orange peel, candied apple, kind of mandarin flavour coming through. It's really, really fruit-driven up front, and then the toffee and the butterscotch rolls in. But then you have the spices from the pot element as well there. So it all comes together and very multi-layered, and you know what, I'm really pleased with it.
Give me a sense into your blending process when you go through and start evaluating samples, as you did last July and as you'll start this summer for the 2023 edition.
Yeah, it's you know what, it's great fun, first of all. There's great enjoyment in it. So what I do is, back probably July again this year, I'll sort of start off with a blank sheet of paper and decide, okay, what direction I want the vintage to go this year. How much grain, how much pot, first fill, second fills, what direction I want, maybe looking back over the last number of years as well. So then what I do is I prepare a sampling list or sampling request, and that goes to our brilliant warehouse foreman, Kevin McSweeney and Brian Fitzgerald. And they go and they sample all these casks. So, for example, MVR 22, I probably had about 350 samples from a range of grain whiskies, pot whiskies, all American barrels. And I pull all these samples together. And then over a number of weeks, a number of months, I start working through these. And I start playing around. And eventually I come up with maybe 8 prototypes of different styles with different inclusion levels. And then what I do is I play around with those and I say, look, I like that one. Maybe I'd like to increase the grain spirit a bit more, or maybe I'd like to bring the oak back. And then I narrowed it down to 3 prototypes, and that was probably November. And by the end of November, I brought those 3 prototypes home one weekend, and I sat down in the comfort of my own home and really, I suppose, assess the whiskey, because it was decision time. Then, Mark, you have to make a decision. And I talked to my wife about it. Deirdre appreciates whiskey as well, and we'd have a good chat about it. And really, by the Sunday, I decided then it was prototype number 1, coincidentally, and that was the final decision. And away we go, and that was it.
Tell me about those discussions with Deirdre, because does she challenge you on them, or does she go along with your decisions, or at least with your thinking on these? Yeah,
we actually agreed it was number 1. It's and sometimes, not sometimes, nearly always at whiskey, you go with your gut instinct. Your first impressions on a whiskey, when you're nosing it or when you're tasting it, I always say just go with your first instincts. What do you think of that nose? What do you think of that flavour? And that was the one that we both agreed on, and which was. That was great, all right. We all agreed. So, and that was the one, yeah.
You face a challenge this year because the next edition you create is going to be the 40th Midleton Very Rare. Does that put extra pressure on you?
Not really, to be honest. I suppose the first year was really different. There was an awful lot happening in the first year. Then the second year, in music terms, they say the second album is the most difficult one. So, no, I think I'm looking forward to it. I really am. And we'll get stuck in probably in July now, and we'll get the samples running again. And I'm really looking forward to that one.
It's been almost 2 years now since you became the Master Distiller. What have you learned that you didn't know before you took the job?
What have I learned? Look, it's been an extremely busy 2 years, but it's been just an amazing privilege and an honour. It really has. I suppose I was in a lucky position that Brian and myself worked very closely together for probably since 1998. So we had a very, very close working relationship. Brian looked after distillation, I looked after maturation. But along with Billy and the rest of the team, there was a lot of close collaboration. And, I would know what's going on in distillation. We'd collaborate a lot. Likewise, Brian would know what's going on in maturation, and Billy as well. So we had a really good team approach. So I was very much aware of, what was coming down the tracks when I got the job 2 years ago. There was no major surprises. And I suppose working in the company for the years prior to that, working with Brian and working with Billy and the rest of the team, that was a huge help to me. So no major surprises. I suppose the one thing would be maybe, I've done a lot more maybe interviews and a lot more media stuff, which is all good fun as well. So, it's no major surprises. It's been just a wonderful journey for the last 2 years. It really has.
Let's move on to the Dergelach, the Kylebeck Wood edition. What's unique about this edition? It came out several months ago, but what's unique about it? And tell me about the process you went through to create it.
Yeah, so Midleton Dergelach, for all your listeners, is basically, it's Irish oak, so it's Gaelic for Irish oak. So Dar is Gaelic for oak, and Gaelach is obviously Irish, so it's Irish oak. So what it is really is that we select a range of single pot still whiskies. So this is a single pot still whiskey. We select a range of single pot still whiskies, and in this particular case, the age range was between 13 and 23 years of age. That was already matured in American oak barrels. And what we did then, we finish it in Irish oak for, in this case, 15 months. Now, the Irish oak in this case comes from Kylebeck Wood, which comes from County Laois, which is about 1 hour from Dublin, thereabouts. And the farm is owned by David Walsh Chemist. And, the farm, it's in that family for generations. and they have been, growing oak and other hardwoods for hundreds of years. So we've collaborated with David Walsh a number of years ago. So we felled the trees back in 2015. So we've 7 trees. So the trees were felled at David's farm. And a major part of this collaboration involves Paddy Purser, who's our forester. And we've been working with Paddy probably over 12, 13 years now on this whole project. So after felling the trees, they're actually shipped over to Galicia in northwest Spain. And we're dealing with a sawmills there, Malabar Sawmills, which is run by Gabby and his team. And we've been dealing with those for probably 25, 30 years now. And they've been, I suppose, a key part of the Irish Oak project right from the start. The very first batch we did, which was Grinsel's Wood from Ballitobin, we sent that to Malabar. And, they did such a great job. They know their oak inside out. They know quarter sawing. They know about quality. And we've kept with them this is the 4th edition. We'd Ballitobin, Grinsel's Wood, number 1. We'd Bluebell, number 2. We'd Knockrath, number 3. So this is the 4th edition of Dargawelloch. So once the trees get over to Gabby and the team, they do the quarter sawing. So they quarter saw into staves. Then they're shipped down probably on a 10 or 11 hour journey all the way down to Jerez de la Frontera. And they go down to Antonio Payas in the cooperage. And there the staves are allowed to air dry out in the open for about 15 months. And Mark, the temperatures down in Jerez de la Frontera in July, August, it's very intense. So what you've going on in this air drying is intense heat. Then you'd have some rainfall during the winter time. And this air drying is really, really important in, washing or flushing out a lot of those tannins and acids. So the whole air drying process is really, really important. So then after the air drying process, the casks are manufactured by Antonio Payas, and we make hogsheads. So they're about 240 litre capacity. They receive a light toast. Okay, we've changed over the years our toasting technique. The first batch we did was sort of a medium to heavy toast, and we pulled back a bit on the toasting just to get more balance into the whiskey. So after receiving their light toast, the casks then are shipped back to Midleton, and it's then we fill them with this very special selection of single pot still whiskies, aged between sort of 13 to 23. And then they're finished in these Irish oak casks for about 15 months. And what it does then is this Irish oak imparts this wonderful flavour into those whiskies. It also allows those 3 different pot still styles of a lighter style, a medium style and a heavier style to intermingle as well. So the whole lot comes together into this amazing flavour, which is Dargawelloch Kylebeg wood.
But the one thing you do, and forgive me if you already mentioned this, was that you keep the wood from each tree separate throughout the process so that each tree makes its own casks.
Yeah, so that idea actually started, Ger Buckley, who's our master cooper, and you know Ger. Oh, yeah. We were travelling back from Grinsel's Wood back many, many years ago for the first batch. And on the way back from Kilkenny, we were chatting to Ger, and we had such a wonderful day, which was our first felling of Irish oak with probably 100 years destined for barrels. And we were chatting away on the way down, and then, Ger and myself were thinking, God, there's a huge amount of work going in here, felling the trees, shipping them to Galicia. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could actually track that tree and bring it all the way to the bottle? And that's actually how it happened. It was a chat in the car, myself and Ger. And so what we do for the last 4 releases of Dargawelloch is basically we track every bottle, and we have a bottle here in front of us. Every bottle can be traced to a particular tree number. So I suppose initially it was quite challenging, but we've a process set up now for the whole thing, and it works out easier. But certainly it causes quite a lot of headaches in terms of tracking the logs and the staves and making sure everything is kept separate. And also then when it comes to labelling and bottling, there's a number of challenges. But you know what? It's worth it. I think it just creates a great buzz. The really important thing for me is that people can identify subtle differences between the tree numbers in the one forest. And this shows you that trees growing in different areas in the same forest can give you different flavour compounds. And that's all down to growing conditions, altitude, ground conditions, and that's what gives you different flavour notes. So I think that is just wonderful, whereby people can just pick up different flavours and different aromas from trees from the same forest. It's wonderful. It's brilliant.
Well, I think we should taste it.
I think so. Absolutely. Let's go.
While we're tasting this, let's talk about the sustainability part of this, because that was the whole reason behind the Irish Oak Dergelach project to begin with.
Absolutely. I mean, when we started out initially, Mark, I suppose we had two clear objectives. One was to produce a whiskey of outstanding quality, which we have. But the second one was to ensure that we harvested all the trees in a sustainable manner. So all the farmers that we've dealt with for the 4 releases are really, I suppose, so motivated and enthusiastic about sustainability and how they develop their forest and how they grow their forest. They're just wonderful to work with. And likewise with David Walsh in Kylebeg, he's an amazing farm. He has cereal, but forestry is a key part of what he does. And again, it's been handed down through the generations. And this particular Kylebeg wood, the trees were planted here he reckons probably the mid-1800s. The original trees that were felled back then were probably used in the Napoleonic Wars for shipbuilding, etc. So they were planted. So an amazing history with this Kylebeg wood. But what's really interesting, I suppose, is that there's two things. One with this whole forestry with David Walsh Chemist is that in that particular region of County Laois, if you go back 25, 30 years ago, and David himself will vouch for this, that there was lots of grey squirrels in that area, and he remembers as a young boy walking in the woods, and there was grey squirrels, and grey squirrels were taken into Ireland maybe 100 years ago, and they really are, I suppose, invasive in that they push out the native red squirrel. So our beautiful native red squirrel is beginning to, was really squeezed out. But what's happened with this forestry technique that David has, that it's continuous cover. So you pick sort of individual trees to create openings and light for new oak trees to develop. But by having continuous cover and not clear felling, that allows certain, development for squirrels, for different animals, and one of those animals is actually the pine marten, and that pine marten doesn't really get on with the grey squirrel. So what's happened is, because of the return of the pine marten into those forests, it has pushed out the grey squirrel, which has allowed the red squirrel, who actually gets on with the pine marten. He's not a natural predator of the red squirrel, so the red squirrel now has made a comeback. So for the last 10 years, David can now walk in his forest, and now he sees lots of red squirrels, the native red squirrel. Now, this just doesn't happen in Kylebeg Wood. This is happening in lots of forests, but Kylebeg Wood is an example. And there's been studies done in this region in County Laois, in Kylebeg Wood in particular, by the University College Galway, by Maynooth University, just analysing how the return of the pine marten, the pushing out of the grey squirrel, and the return of the red squirrel. And you know what? Being part of this is just an amazing part of the whole Kylebeg story. It's wonderful. And David is so proud himself of walking the forest now and seeing the red squirrel. He's amazed.
By the way, next year will be a very special year for Kevin. In addition to 2023 marking the 40th release of Midleton Very Rare, it'll be Kevin's 25th anniversary at the distillery. We'll see what he has in store next spring. Full disclosure, I was in Dublin as the guest of Irish Distillers, but as always, full editorial control over the content of this episode remains with WhiskyCast. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the Jameson Remastered 15-year-old single pot still whiskey that we heard about during the news. It's bottled at 56.4% ABV. The nose has notes of marzipan, toasted caramel, roasted nuts, raisins, honey, and subtle spices. The taste is thick and spicy with tropical fruits like pineapple and orange, along with figs, dates, honey, and touches of clove and cardamom. Adding a few drops of water makes it more well-rounded, opening up both the fruitiness and the spices. The finish is long and spicy with subtle hints of fruit as well. In music terms, it's a hit. I'm scoring the Jameson Remastered 15-year-old a 95. Kevin and I discussed the latest Midleton Very Rare release a few minutes ago. Kylebeck Wood Tree No. 1 was bottled at 55.6% ABV. The nose has touches of dark chocolate, wood spices, blackberries, hints of plums and hazelnut, and a touch of coffee beans. The taste starts off vibrant and spicy at first, with notes of ginger, toffee, and butterscotch that come alive slowly as the spices start to fade. The finish, long and dry with a touch of shortbread cookies. I'm scoring the Very Rare Kylebeck Wood Tree No. 1 a 93. I'll have my tasting notes for the other 6 trees soon at the WhiskyCast website. More tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore Farm and Waterfront Distillery. They're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting, too. When you buy a bottle at your local retailer, then visit SagamoreSpirit.com and use the code word WhiskyCast, and a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through it. Please drink responsibly. Dewar's is out with the second annual release of its 19th hole 19-year-old whiskey, tied to the U.S. Open coming up this June at the Country Club near Boston. It's based on the limited edition Scratched Cask edition from several years ago, with a combination of finishing in ex-bourbon, virgin American oak, and rye casks. It's bottled at 43% ABV. The nose has notes of vanilla, wood spices, dried fruits, and a nice maltiness. The taste has a good balance of maltiness along with wood spices and fruity notes of dried apricots, peaches, and fresh berries, and hints of vanilla and espresso, too. The finish is long with gentle spices, lingering fruitiness, and that same hint of espresso. I'm scoring the 2022 Dewar's 19th hole 19-year-old blended scotch a 93. A couple of weeks ago, I shared my tasting notes for batch number 1 of Castle and Keys bourbon. It sold out so quickly that the distillery decided to move up the release of batch number 2 by a month. This one has a slightly higher bottling strength at 49.5% ABV, and the nose has touches of soft oak, caramel, vanilla, honey, brown sugar, and hints of dried fruits. The taste is thick and chewy with good spicy notes of black pepper, cinnamon candies, and allspice that are complemented by touches of dried fruits, honey, vanilla, and brown sugar that come out as the spices fade. The finish is long with lingering spices, dried fruits, and a hint of oak. I'm scoring Castle and Key Straight Bourbon Batch Number 2 a 94. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
People never forget the person who introduced them to Redbreast. And then those people go on to introduce others to Redbreast, and soon the flock has grown exponentially. It's like a pyramid scheme. Without any of the bad stuff, of course.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
It's time to announce our latest Whiskey Club of the Month. Congratulations to Uskaba Budian, based in Olympia, Washington, and thanks to Tim Hareen for sending us this email to nominate his club. Here's what he had to say. We have a small club that meets once a month to try a new bottle. This last month, we did Barrelman's Grand Cru 18. We are working through our format. We usually start with introductions of new people, then a bit about the bottle of the month, then a taste test where we compare notes. We are local in Olympia, Washington, but have members all around the U.S. and one in Canada that join us via Zoom, hoping to add some more. The breadth and depth of experience of new members always brings new perspectives. Love your podcast. Thank you, Tim. We're going to send you 24 WhiskyCast Glencairn glasses to use at your club tastings, and I'd love to join you for one of those Zoom tastings one night. Now, if you're in a whiskey club and would like to nominate your club for next month, it's easy. Just do like Tim did and use the contact form at whiskycast.com to nominate your club. Tell us a bit about your club, and if you have a website or a social media presence, we'll be glad to add a link on our Whiskey Clubs page at the WhiskyCast website. Once again, congratulations to Uskaba Budian, April's Whiskey Club of the Month, and thanks to Glencairn Crystal for helping us support whiskey clubs all over the world. Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Saw this tweet from Alan Chanel the other day while I was in Dublin, along with a photo of Westland's original peated American single malt. Here's what he had to say. 2022 may be my year of delving through the Westland whiskey expressions. I thank WhiskyCast for a rave review last year of their American single malt, which is likely my next purchase. It made me aware of Westland. Can't wait to share this. Glad to help, Alan. I wanted to thank everyone in Ireland who invited me to meet up for a dram or a pint while I was over there. But I was just in Dublin for a couple of days with a jam-packed schedule, so I did not have time to connect with a lot of old friends. But as the Terminator says, I'll be back. And on that note, longtime listener Bunkai H tweeted a photo of a cute kitten-faced robot with this note. Being served by a kitty robot in a Japanese restaurant near Chicago. I was waiting for it to say, I'll be back. That prompted this response from Anne at SparksMom53. Well, that's interesting. Do you have to tip the robot? I couldn't resist. If you don't tip the robot, it automatically takes 20% of your bank account and kills your credit rating. That is bound to get more of the online feedback I see occasionally about my terrible sense of humor and dad jokes. But if you have dad or mom jokes to share, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with me on social media. I'm at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the unique Islay single malt forged by the whiskey-making traditions of 3 generations of the Lang family. Look for it at your local Total Wine and More in the U.S. and specialist whiskey shops worldwide. Find out more at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Working from home has become something that most of us are way too familiar with these days. It's not exactly working from home, but many of Scotland's distilleries used to provide on-site housing for their workers. Since a lot of distilleries were located out in the country, away from urban areas, they sort of had to provide housing as a benefit to get people to leave cities and towns to come work at the distilleries. Except for the traditional manager's housing, that has largely become a thing of the past, except at Tomatin Distillery near Inverness. Many of the distillery's workers still live in company-provided housing, and that makes distillery manager Graham Unson the unofficial mayor of Tomatin. I asked him about that role on a Zoom call with whiskey writers this past week.
I always say it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. If you fall out with your neighbour, you're going to fall out with your colleagues, vice versa type thing. But overall, the good thing about it is that it's not a job. You know, the people who live in the distillery grounds, it's a lifestyle. You know, I've been fortunate to have done that a few times throughout my life, and there is something special about raising kids with the distillery there for them to go and play in. Now, health and safety nowadays would probably say empty barrels aren't the safest playground, but it never harmed my kids, and they've both actually joined in the whisky industry as they've grown older. So it is a special sort of feature to have so many of our colleagues who live, breathe, everything is Tomatin for them. It's where they've grown up, it's where their forefathers grew up, and that sort of generational sort of glue that sticks them together is fantastic, in as much as they take much more ownership, more passion towards the distillery, towards the brand, than a lot of places will. There are arguably more famous whiskies in the world, but I don't think they will have the same level of passion from all of the employees, because it is their life. Everything revolves around the distillery community. The distillery revolves around the community revolves around the distillery. It's all so intermingled that it is actually a really good bonus, I would say.
By the way, Tomatin is one of the few remaining independently owned distilleries in Scotland that has all of its management on site as well, including the sales and marketing folks. No fancy offices in Edinburgh or Glasgow for them. If you have something you'd like to see us look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers, bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Classic Scotch cocktails are making a resurgence, and the Dewar's Highball is a great way to brighten up some of your favorite Scotch whiskey. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Happy sailing. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.